I live in a small valley in the Rocky Mountains and have been renting for the past decade, so I move a lot. Right after COVID, my partner and I were desperate to get out of the small studio we went through quarantine in and rented one of the first properties we could find that was pet-friendly, as we have a cat and dog. It was an old townhouse on a quiet road sandwiched between a graveyard and a river. I am definitely sensitive and have had some unexplainable experiences in the past, but this is not something I really dig into much. I attributed those experiences to living in an area with lots of history, such as an apartment I once rented that used to be an old mining cabin whose former resident died very young, or a house in the woods I once rented that went on the market because its elderly owner passed away from an accident. I understand some energies linger, and I try to just let them do their thing while I do mine. My partner, on the other hand, is a non-believer. Fast forward to the new townhouse. I wasn't sure if the graveyard would be a problem, so I did the walkthrough with my dog to do a vibe check. All was gravy. I visited it again before signing the lease and everything felt calm. I moved in late spring, nothing out of the ordinary until fall. About a week after Halloween, my partner wanted to put away our summer gear and told me he's going to move into a crawl space beneath the stairs, which I had no idea was there. I immediately got a weird feeling and said not to go down there, but he laughed it off. He opened it up, climbed into an underground space that was a dirt floor and stone walls maybe 9 feet wide in each direction, and I popped my head down and did not like it. The only thing down there was an old creepy painting leaning against the wall of a lone tree on top of a hill at night. I didn't like that either. I told him again not to move anything down there and close it up. I come home the next day and he has stored all our summer gear down there, and the painting is in the living room. Dude, what the hell? I made him put it back down in the space, and the activity started within a day. At first, small things that eventually came to a crescendo. The following night we went out to dinner. I left the hallway light on for the animals. We got home and the light was off. Well, I certainly didn't do it. The bulb hadn't burst, and the switch had been flipped. It's easy to brush off that maybe we didn't actually leave the light on to begin with, but I had gone back into the house specifically to turn it on for my dog before we left. Upstairs there's a long hallway with our bedroom on one end that faces the river, and another room we use as my office/gear room. This one faced the graveyard and has a window pointing straight to it. If you looked down the hallway through that room's door, you looked out the window right at the graveyard. My partner never liked that, so we mostly kept it shut. A few days later I was working in the office during the day, and my cat knocked a large glass off my desk and it shattered. I swept it up, put the broken glass in the upstairs bathroom, and I walked down the stairs a million times during the day because I like to snack while I work and take breaks downstairs, and we have a porch that overlooked the river. I never thought twice about going up and down those stairs. That evening though, while my husband and I were chilling downstairs, I wanted to grab something from the bedroom. Right as I was about to run up the stairs, I got a weird feeling in my gut, and I flipped on the lights in the stairway, which I never used. And there, on the steps, was the broken glass from my cup. Had I taken one step, I would have impaled my foot on a massive chunk of it. I looked in the upstairs bin, and the other pieces of my cup were still in there, and the bin was upright. There's no way my cat could have dragged it out the bin, and my dog never liked going upstairs alone. After that, things escalated. We both saw flying light orbs in the living room that the cat would chase. One time when my cat was meowing, I watched the macrame tassel from a potted plant nowhere near the window in a completely still fan-free room smack him in the face. Then one night, around 3:30 a.m., we were sleeping in bed and heard a huge crash come from the office. We had an industrial shelf in there, and on it we had a locking carabiner hanging with all of our rock climbing gear linked to it. At least 15 pounds worth of gear. Now if you've ever used a carabiner, you know the only way to unlink or unhang from it is for something to push the lever and actively lift it, and somehow with all our gear attached to it, this thing was removed from our shelf and dropped on the floor. My non-believer partner was so disturbed by this, he was convinced someone was in the house and searched our entire place with his gun. He then went outside and searched the perimeter of the house. As soon as the door shut, there were 3 loud knocks on the bedroom wall just above my head. We were the last townhome on the row, and this wall was the outer wall of the house on the 2nd story, with nothing outside of it. After this, the explicability of 15 pounds of rock climbing gear unhanging itself in the middle of the night, you can imagine that my partner finally began to believe there was something strange going on in our home. At this point, it had still been less than a month from going into the crawl space. Then conversation started. We began hearing a man and woman talking in the corner of our room. It sounded like you were standing on the other side of a door listening to a conversation. You could hear the back and forth of a distinct male and female voice. It was so loud I made my partner go into the upper crawl space beneath the roof to make sure there weren't people living in there. I checked with neighbors to see if they heard anything weird. They all thought I was nuts. Our neighbor next door was an old lady that lived alone. No man in the house, and we would lay in bed at night and listen to these people talk in the far corner of our room. We began to have night terrors. I never had a night terror or sleep paralysis before in my life. I would wake up screaming help and my partner's name trying to move, to wake myself up. One night in one of these episodes, I saw a male figure in all black with unnaturally long limbs and a big boar head crawling all over my body. He was at my feet in bed, crawling towards my head. While I tried to scream for help, just as he was about to reach my head, I worked up to my partner lunging over me. He said he woke up and saw something crawl over my body and was trying to push it off. I asked him to describe it, and we had seen the same entity. I began sleeping downstairs on the sofa, but the night terrors didn't stop. We continued to see the light orbs, hear the conversations, and experience poltergeist activity. I got so desperate, I even went to the church to see if a priest could bless the house. He told me that because I was not a practicing Catholic, my lifestyle would just invite demons back, and while I was on the phone in my office talking about inviting the priest over to bless the house, all the lights began to flicker. While we lived there, every member of our household became incredibly ill, even our animals. The cats and dogs began throwing up and peeing and pooping in the house, which they had never done before. My cat was diagnosed with kidney disease. My partner got so sick he had to have surgery and suffered from vertigo, and my own autoimmune disease, which I managed very well up until that point, had the worst flare-up in a decade. Though, it could have just been triggered by stress. Thank God our lease was over a month or 2 after that first year, and we desperately moved out. Once we moved, all the paranormal activity ceased. We slept soundly, and I have not had a night terror or sleep paralysis episode since. Everyone is healthy. My vet said my cat no longer has any signs of kidney disease, and I also ran into someone that worked in a building 2 blocks down the road from our house, and they also said their building had a ton of paranormal activity that turned them into a believer. I'm convinced it was the location between the graveyard and the river that attracted all of it. I've always leaned heavily skeptical when it comes to anything paranormal. I don't believe in an afterlife, nor do I believe in ghosts, and I tend to default to logic, even when something doesn't feel right. That being said, I have had a couple of experiences that I can't fully explain, and while I wouldn't say I believe, I'm a lot less quick to dismiss things outright than I used to be. This is one of those experiences. When I was 16, I was staying with my grandparents for the summer like I usually did, and my aunt and uncle asked if I could house sit for them over a weekend while they were out of town. For a 16-year-old with a brand new driver's license, that was a dream scenario. My own place for a few days, with no supervision. I packed up my PlayStation, rented a few games, a movie, grabbed some snacks and headed over to their house. The first night was completely uneventful, but I remember feeling just slightly uneasy being there alone. Nothing specific was happening, nothing I could point to, Just that subtle sense of something not being right. But I brushed it off as nerves for it being my first time alone at someone else's house. Well, at 1 a.m. I decided to call it a night. I let the dogs out into the backyard, watched them do their thing, then brought them back in and went through the house making sure everything was locked. Deadbolts, chain locks, the whole routine. I was careful about double-checking everything before heading to bed. The next morning, that same uneasy feeling was still there in the background. So I got up, made some coffee, let the dogs out again, and went through a normal morning routine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After breakfast, I decided to get out for a bit and meet up with some friends. I put the dogs in their crates, locked up the house and left. I was gone for about 4 hours, maybe a little less, and when I came back in the mid-afternoon, everything changed instantly. The dogs were losing their minds. Not excited, not barking because I was home, but this was panic. They were whining, shaking and howling, one of them even slightly foaming at the mouth. And these are normal, calm, lazy dogs that were perfectly happy to sleep in their crates for hours, so seeing them like this immediately put me on edge. I opened their crates, but neither of them would come out. They just stayed pressed into the back corners, like they were scared to move. At that point, I was freaked out enough to start checking the house. I went room by room, checking windows, doors, closets. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, locked, undisturbed and empty. That's when I started thinking about the upstairs. The house was old, late 1800s, and had originally been a duplex. The upstairs was a separate apartment, and while my aunt and uncle didn't rent it out anymore, they hadn't fully converted it back into a part of the house either. My uncle used it as a home office, and the door leading up there, which was on an enclosed porch off the kitchen, usually stayed shut and locked. Since the dogs were acting so strange, I figured I should check it out too. I unlocked the door and went upstairs, and the first thing I noticed was that one of the computers was on. That was weird because my uncle had left a note saying he'd shut everything down and even unplugged the surge protectors before they left. I assumed he'd just forgotten in a rush and didn't think much of it. With storms expected later, I shut the computer down, unplugged everything and went back downstairs, locking the door behind me. By then, the dogs had calmed down a bit and eventually came out of their crates, settling into their usual spots on the couch. I tried to relax, telling myself it was nothing, and spent the afternoon playing games and watching movies. Things stayed quiet until that evening. Around 8 p.m, one of the dogs suddenly stood up on the couch, fur raised along his back, staring directly at the door leading to the upstairs. He started growling, focused, and nothing I could do would distract him. This went on for several minutes before he finally settled back down, but the tension in the room didn't really go away. A few hours later, around 11 p.m, both dogs started up again, this time more intense, and that's when I heard a creaking sound coming from upstairs. It was not a random house noise, neither pipe or wind, but something rhythmic, like a weight shifting on a loose floorboard. Not quite footsteps though, but it was impossible to ignore. I went to check the door to the upstairs and immediately noticed it was unlocked, which was odd as I had locked it. And that's when my brain went into worst case scenario. Someone was in the house. I backed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, because apparently that's exactly what you do when you're a terrified 16-year-old, and checked the back porch, which would have been the most likely way someone would have gotten in. But it was still locked. The creaking continued overhead. I opened the door to the stairs, and the noise stopped instantly. I turned on the lights and went upstairs, heart pounding, expecting to find someone. But there was nothing. Everything was exactly as I had left it, computers off, cords unplugged, no sign of anyone. Feeling a little bit stupid but still on edge, I went back downstairs and locked the door again. At that point I decided I was done for the night. I put on another movie, lay down on the couch with the dogs and eventually fell asleep. A few hours later at 2 a.m, I woke up to the dogs in full panic mode because the creaking was back. And then something else started. I heard a dial tone clear as day coming from upstairs. Then the unmistakable sound of a modem dialing, numbers being punched in, and the connection attempt starting. This was early 2000s dial-up, so it was very distinct, and I sat there for a moment trying to convince myself I was still asleep. But of course, I was not. I grabbed the knife again and went to the upstairs door, unlocked it again, and opened it, and just like before, the sound stopped immediately. I checked everything. It was still unplugged, still off, no one was there. I went back down, locked the door, and tried to calm the dogs. But about 10 minutes later it started again. The modem dialing over and over, trying to connect, failing, dialing again. This time the creaking sounded more like actual footsteps. I stayed there for another half hour just listening, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. The dogs were inconsolable, and whatever was happening upstairs wasn't letting up. Eventually I hit my limit. I grabbed the dogs, loaded them into the car and locked up the house, and got out of there as fast as I could. I drove straight back to my grandparents' place and stayed there for the rest of the night. The next morning when I explained everything, fully expecting them to think I lost my mind, they didn't seem surprised at all. Apparently strange things had been happening in that house for years. My cousin had woken up screaming multiple times about a shadow man standing over his bed. My uncle had found the gas stove turned on but unlit, filling the house with gas, with no explanation. Doors left open, things moved, small things, but it added up over time. I still don't consider myself a believer, but I also don't have a clean, logical explanation for what I experienced that weekend. And I think that bothers me more than anything else. To preface, I am not a believer in the afterlife, nor in a specific higher power. I have always been logical to a fault, mostly unemotional, and pretty hard to rattle simply because I don't tend to care all that much about what's going on around me. I'm a huge daydreamer and usually drift off in my own head. I used to start stories like this with, "I don't believe in the supernatural, but," and while I still don't really believe, I've definitely lost some of the certainty and arrogance I had when I was younger. I know I'm not insane, so at this point I just kind of accept that some things don't line up neatly. In my second year of college, I rented an old carriage house that had been converted into a tiny apartment. It was honestly amazing in that very specific broken college kid way. There was no insulation, gas floor heaters, and staircase so wide and steep that you could have driven an ATV up it without much trouble. It was my first time living completely alone and I loved it. Even though I'd get a little spooked at night trying to fall asleep, I had my bed set up like a canopy princess bed, fully aware of how ridiculous that sounds, and I always pulled the sheer curtain around it before going to sleep, which is a relevant factor. Despite the occasional unease at night, I actually felt strangely safe there, safer than I probably should have, considering I lived alone in a decent-sized college town and regularly forgot to lock the door. There wasn't any clear reason for it. I just chalked it up to really liking the place and enjoying being on my own. The only odd thing were the stairs. Almost every time you went up them, they'd make this distinct popping sound right behind you, like footsteps following just out of sync. It was clearly just the old wood settling, especially in a house built in the late 1800s, but it only ever happened going up, never down. I noticed it, thought it was a little weird, and then immediately stopped caring, which was pretty on brand for me at 19. About 3 months in, I had one experience that stuck with me more than anything else I've ever had. I was laying in bed, struggling to fall asleep like usual, when suddenly I drifted off. At some point during the night, I woke up abruptly, fully alert, no grogginess at all. I was on my side, facing out through the sheer curtains into my room, and in the far corner, I saw someone crouched on the floor, clear as day, not shadowy or vague, but it was solid. They were hunched over with their back to me, like they were focused on something on the ground. The clothing looked rough, almost like burlap, and even though I couldn't see their faces, I somehow knew it was a woman. I can't explain that part at all. It was just a certainty that came with seeing her. The strangest part is that I wasn't scared, not even a little. I remember thinking I should be, that this was objectively terrifying, but I just watched, calm, awake, and aware, but not afraid. She stayed there for a few moments, never turning towards me, continuing whatever she was doing on the floor. I remember thinking, for some reason, that she might be feeding an animal, though I have no idea why that came to me. Then, just as suddenly as I had woken up, I fell back asleep. In the morning, I told myself it had been a dream, but I didn't fully buy that explanation. Even back then, I knew about sleep paralysis and how weird dreams can get. So I filed it under that and moved on. But after that night, something changed in the apartment. The feeling of safety I had before intensified to an almost ridiculous level. There were moments I'd be sitting there and think, completely out of nowhere, wow, I feel so loved right now. And for no reason at all. And the stairs? They stopped making that trail popping sound entirely. For the rest of the 2 years I lived there, it never happened again. I kind of thought of her as my guardian after that, in a half-joking, half-serious way. Whatever that experience was, it never felt threatening. And I never once felt afraid of that apartment again. So the second haunted house experience I had, and definitely the more intense and freaky of the two, was one I shared with my college BFF and our mutual best friend, plus a rotating cast of other friends and acquaintances who came and went through the 4th bedroom over the time we lived there. We were in that house for about a year and a half during junior and senior year, and honestly, there were so many weird things happening on a regular basis that I could probably go on forever. But I'm going to stick to the stuff we all agreed was definite. The main thing was the knocking, the baby crying, the smell, and the basement. Let me give you a quick background. The three of us, my BFF and mutual best friend, rented this really old house, like early 1900s old, sitting right on the edge of 3 completely different parts of town. One direction was the rougher area, one was the college zone, and the other led towards the nicer neighborhoods, so there was a constant flow of people through our place. It turned into a bit of a hub. People stopping by between classes, hanging out, parties, all that. My BFF was into paranormal stuff, but not in a weird or obsessive way. More like she grew up around Appalachian folklore and just had a healthy respect for it. Mutual best friend was kind of neutral but open-minded, whereas I, on the other hand, as I said, was a full-on skeptic. I'd had a couple of odd experiences before, but nothing I couldn't brush off, so I didn't buy into any of it. And that's when the knocking started. It began almost immediately after we moved in, but none of us realized it was happening to all of us for about a month, because we each assumed it was just random house noises or someone messing around. You'd be in your room, or the bathroom, or anywhere with the door closed, and you'd hear 3 loud, deliberate knocks, not random creaking, 3 clean, evenly spaced knocks like someone standing right outside. You'd call out, "Come in," or "Who is it?" and there'd be no reply. Just another set of knocks, always in the same pattern, and there'd never be anyone there. It happened most often on interior doors, especially the bathroom door, on either of the doors connected to mutual best friend's room. His room was kind of central, with one door to the bathroom, one to the living room, and one to my bedroom. So everything sort of looped around. Weirdly, it never happened on exterior doors. At first, we all just brushed it off in our own way. Old house noises, roommates messing around with each other, whatever. Then one night, we were all sitting in the living room just hanging out, and my BFF casually brought it up. She described exactly what had been happening, and all three of us just kind of froze and looked at each other like, wait, you too? We compared stories, laughed it off a bit because it didn't feel threatening at that point, and moved on. My BFF floated the idea that it might be something paranormal, and mutual best friend was like, maybe. But I shut it down completely. But it kept happening, and eventually it started happening when we knew no one else was on the other side of the door. That night, it really escalated and it burned into my memory. BFF and I were sitting on the couch watching TV, and a mutual best friend was in his room with all his doors shut. From where we were sitting, we could see his bedroom door clearly, and the bathroom door nearby was open, so we knew no one was there. Suddenly, mutual best friend calls out, "Come in," even though we hadn't heard anything. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes only the person in the room hears the knocking. And a second later he shouts it again, louder and more irritated. "Come in?" My BFF and I are kind of laughing, thinking he's just getting annoyed, and I'm about to yell something back when there's this massive bang from his room. Not like a knock, but something heavy, slammed hard enough to shake the walls. Less than a second later, his door flies open so hard it almost looked like it would come off the hinges, and he bolts into the living room, stopping dead against the far wall. He's breathing hard, eyes wide in a way I'd never seen before, and staring at us like something happened which he couldn't process. We're both freaking out at this point, asking him what the hell just happened, and he tells us the knocking had been coming from both doors at once, from the bathroom and the living room side. He got fed up and went to yank open the bathroom door, but as he pulled it, it ripped out of his hand and slammed shut on its own, way harder than it should have been physically possible. That was the bang, and that was what sent him running. The knocking never stopped after that. It just became part of living there. Anyone who spent enough time at our place experienced it eventually. And we got to the point where we told people not to respond out loud anymore. Just go open the door if you heard it. Not because we thought we were being smart about it, just because we were tired of hearing people shout, "Come in," from every room in the house. And then there was the baby. This was different. It didn't feel random like the knocking, it felt more specific. The first time it happened to me, I was laying down in the middle of the day about to take a nap, and heard the sound of a baby crying. It sounded really close, like just outside the house. So I went into my BFF's room, thinking it was coming from her window, and it still sounded like it was just outside. I looked, and there was nothing there. There was a house next door, so I figured it was just a loud baby and weird acoustics. It kept happening though, always when I was lying down, always sounding unnaturally close. Eventually I mentioned it to my BFF, and she immediately said she'd been hearing the same thing, same situation, same clarity, and same confusion. We brought it up to the mutual best friend later, and he admitted he'd heard it too but hadn't thought much of it. A few days later, he ran into the neighbors and decided to ask. Turns out they were 3 older guys with no kids or babies to be seen, and they said they hadn't heard anything like it at all. That's when it started to feel less like a coincidence. We began asking other people who spent a lot of time at our house, whether it be friends, people crashing, or anyone who was around regularly, and a surprising number of them had noticed it too. The weird part was the consistency. Almost everyone heard it during the day, and almost always while lying down. We tried everything to figure out where it was coming from. We'd hear it and then immediately go outside, walk around the house, and try to triangulate the sound, but no matter where you stood, it always sounded like it was just on the other side of the wall. Inside it sounded like it was outside. Outside it sounded like it was inside, and it always centered around Best Friend Forever's room. It never moved, never got closer or further, just stayed fixed in that one impossible spot. One of the biggest reasons we eventually felt comfortable about talking about any of this with other people was because of how often someone new would bring it up. A significant other or a friend who hadn't heard anything about the house would casually ask something like, "Hey, what's with the knocking on the bedroom doors?" Or, "Do you guys hear a baby crying during the day sometimes?" That was the part that made it hard to ignore. It wasn't just us feeding off each other or imagining things. It was happening to people who had no context or reason to think anything weird was going on. And that's when I had to admit, as much as I didn't want to, that something about the house was genuinely not right. My family moved into a century-old house when I turned 5. The bedrooms were massive compared to anything we were used to, so instead of splitting us up, my parents decided to put all 3 of us kids in the same room. I was the only girl, my older brother had one bed, and my baby brother slept in a crib, while I had the other. There was so much space that our bunk beds weren't even stacked. We had them separated across the room like 2 islands with the crib off to the side. For a while it was fun and adventurous, but the feeling didn't last. So one night I woke up for no reason I can discern at all. There was no noise that I could hear that disturbed my slumber or any dream that I could remember. Just the jolt awake. Now the room was quiet, but not in a comforting way. I could feel something was off, even though I couldn't explain why at that age. And that is when I saw them. On either side of my bed, something pitch black was rising up slowly, like shadows peeling themselves off the floor. They looked like arms, long and unnatural, stretching upwards along the edges of the mattress, as if they were reaching for me. They weren't attached to a body that I could see, just these 2 dark shapes. That was when I froze. The fear I felt locked my body in place, and I wanted to scream, but couldn't. And then, almost at the same time, my older brother started screaming too. I turned my head just enough to see that same thing was happening to him, those same black reaching shapes creeping up along his bed. We both started yelling for our dad over and over, our voices breaking, waiting for him to come in running, like he always did when something was wrong. But he never came. That somehow made it worse, like whatever was happening wasn't normal in any sense. The fear built so fast that it flipped into something else, something almost desperate. I remember feeling this sudden rush of anger cutting through the panic, and I shouted as loudly as I could, "Get out!" The second I said it, the arms stopped. Then, just as slowly as they had risen, they slid back down out of sight, like they had never been there at all. I didn't have time to process it, because almost immediately after, something else happened. Figures began to appear around my bed. At first, they were just shapes in the dark, but then they became clearer, not detailed, but enough for me to make sense of them in the only way a 5-year-old could. They looked like people wearing long robes, like pictures I had seen of Jesus and his disciples, that being the only reference I had. There were several of them, standing close together surrounding my bed. They moved in slowly, drifting more than walking, and even though I could see their heads turning towards each other like they were talking, there was no sound at all, not a whisper or footstep. It was completely silent, and I just lay there wide awake watching them. They moved from my bed to my brother's, then over to the crib where my baby brother was sleeping, and then back again, like they were checking on each of us one by one. There was something methodical about it. I couldn't understand what they were doing or why. And the worst part is that it made everything feel unreal. Eventually, after what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes, they began to move away. One by one, they drifted towards the window on the east side of the room. It was a 2nd-story window, and I remember thinking, even then, that it didn't make sense, but they didn't stop. They just passed through it, disappearing into the night. When morning came, it almost felt normal again, like daylight had erased whatever happened. But the memory did not go away, and the first thing my brother and I did was look at each other and start talking about it. We described the same things, the arms, the figures, the way they moved. It wasn't one of us imagining it. We had both seen it. We went downstairs for breakfast and told our dad, trying to explain it the only way we knew how. We called them the outer space people because we didn't have the language for anything else. That was the closest thing our minds could compare it to, and he laughed, brushing it off as kids being kids, like we had worked ourselves up over nothing. After that, my brother stopped talking about it entirely. He shut it down whenever I brought it up, like he didn't want to relive it, or perhaps admit it had been real. Years went by before it came up again. When we were in high school, he finally admitted that he remembered everything, and he had seen the same things I had. But even then, he tried to explain it away, saying maybe it was just shadows from tree branches moving across the room. The problem was, there were no trees close enough to the house to cast shadows like that, especially not ones that moved in the way those figures had. To this day, neither of us has a real explanation. What sticks with me almost as much as the experience itself is the fact that we called them the outer space people. We had no real exposure to anything like that growing up. The only thing I can think of is a neighbor from our old neighborhood who used to leave those tabloid magazines in his car, the ones with blurry UFO pictures and stuff. I remember seeing one once and asking my mum about flying saucers, and she just told me they weren't real. And yet that's the word we both landed on. Anyway, that house, I'm convinced there was something wrong with it. That night wasn't the only thing though. Every time I went upstairs by myself, especially into my parents' room, I would hear things moving across the linoleum floor. A quick scraping sound like something darting just out of sight. I started dragging my little brother upstairs with me whenever I needed to go, making excuses so I wouldn't have to go alone, because nothing ever happened when someone else was there with me. Whatever it was, seemed to prefer isolation. Strangely, it all stopped when I hit puberty, but by then the damage was done. There were too many moments and shared experiences for me to ever fully brush it off. I still think about that night sometimes. The silent figures moving between our beds. And, in truth, I don't know what I really saw. For a little background, I'm a 21-year-old female and live with my 21-year-old fiancé in a small rural town in Ireland. We moved into this house in August last year, and since living here, we have had some super weird experiences. I'm very into the paranormal and always have been since I was a child. My fiancé, on the other hand, is a huge skeptic. Our home was built in the mid-1800s and is protected heritage site, so all the exterior walls and windows on the front of the house are original. It's a 2-story house with 3 bedrooms, and I don't know much about the history of the house, only that it was rumored to be an undertaker's home, and they used to keep coffins and things in it. However, I haven't been able to confirm this, and I should also mention we currently have 2 cats. The first experience that really spooked me happened in the first month or so of us living there. At this point we did not have our cats yet. I was home alone as my fiancé was at MMA training, and I was in the living room on the sofa watching TV. And with the layout of the home, the living room leads immediately into the hallway where you can access the stairs, bathroom and kitchen. We tend to leave that door open as it allows for easier access to the bathroom and such. It was evening time, so it was dark, and I'm big on saving money, so I tend to turn off lights when they are not needed, so the hallway was completely dark. I noticed movement from the corner of my eye from the hallway, so I turned to look and saw the silhouette of someone's head at the top of the doorway, as though they were peeking into the living room. It was well above where any average person's head should be. I looked for a moment, and then looked away, mostly because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and it was gone. I had chills and felt like I was frozen in place. I stayed there until my fiancé came home and told him what I had seen, and he brushed me off, saying it was most likely my mind playing tricks on me because I was home alone and couldn't shake the feeling of unease after that. From there, things started to ramp up. Lights randomly would go out only to check the breaker, which is inside our house, and find it had been switched off. Completely. Doors opening and closing, especially our bedroom doors at night. Loud bangs from downstairs, hearing footsteps on the stairs and in the hallway, stopping outside our bedroom. My fiancé and I are terrified. The cats also seem to be affected by things too. On a few occasions they have both come running from downstairs and into our room at breakneck speeds and hid under the blanket for long periods of time. And these cats are not scared easily, are super social and confident cats. I'm not sure what to think or do about this. I want to believe it's all just coincidence, but there have simply been too many weird things happening around us to ignore or write off. I constantly feel like I'm being watched, and I'm just unsure how to proceed. If my house is haunted, I don't know if this thing is malevolent or not, and I am afraid of opening up any communication and inviting it further into our lives. And if anyone has any advice, it would be greatly appreciated. This literally just happened about 15 minutes before sharing this, and I'm still quite shaken and trying to make sense of it. I'm currently staying at my grandma's place, and for whatever reason I just couldn't fall asleep. It was already close to 5 AM, so the whole house was completely quiet, and as far as I knew, everyone else was still asleep. I ended up doing what I usually do when I can't sleep, throw on a jacket and jeans, and went out for a smoke. My room is on the second floor, so I had to go downstairs and then through the basement to get to the door that leads out to the driveway. It's one of these setups where the basement feels a little more closed off than the rest of the house, especially at night. But at the time I didn't dwell on it. I went down, opened the door, stepped outside, and made sure to close it behind me, lighting my cigarette. Everything was normal at first. It was quiet, dark and still. And that is when I heard a knock coming from inside the house. Not loud or aggressive. Gentle, I'd say. 3 knocks evenly spaced. It didn't immediately scare me. My first thought was actually that my mum hadn't woken up, realized I'd gone outside and decided to mess with me. That's exactly the kind of thing she'd do, especially if she knew I was out there alone in the dark. So I smirked to myself and didn't react. I finished the first cigarette like nothing had happened, and lit a second one right after. That's when it happened again. The exact same thing. 3 soft, controlled knocks from inside the basement door. This time it definitely got my attention. I still wasn't fully scared, but I was unsettled enough that I decided to check. I stepped closer to the door and slowly opened it, expecting to see someone standing there or maybe hear someone moving around inside, but there was nothing. The basement was completely empty. I even pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it around the room, checking corners and looking towards the stairs. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound, and there was absolutely no sign anyone had been there at all. That's when the feeling changed from feeling weird to genuinely uncomfortable. Because at that point the only explanation I had was someone messing with me, and now that didn't make sense. I closed the door again and stood there for a moment trying to convince myself it was just the house settling, or some random noises echoing weirdly, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like something meant me to hear the sound, and the fact it happened twice in the exact same way made it all the harder to dismiss. The problem was I didn't really have a choice but to go back inside through that same basement. My grandpa always locks the front door overnight, so going around it wasn't an option. I finished my cigarette, took a moment to steady myself and then opened the door again, and ran straight through the basement up the stairs all the way back to my room without stopping. I didn't look around or check anything else. I just got out of there as fast as I could. Even once I got back upstairs, I had that lingering feeling that I shouldn't have turned my back on the space so quickly. I've never had anything like that happen before. I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in anything supernatural, and I'm usually pretty good at finding some kind of logical explanation for things, even if it's a stretch. but this one's bothering me because I can't easily explain it away. I'm a 29-year-old female, and used to be very interested in all things paranormal when I was young. I grew up watching all the TV shows, Paranormal State, Ghost Adventures, etc., and I used to frequent different most haunted places websites, and I used to always seek out videos or photo evidence of the paranormal. Whenever I talk about the paranormal with people these days, my tone has changed a bit. I've become a skeptic over the years due to the lack of personal experiences as I've gotten older that I still can't really explain. And I wonder what you guys think. The first experience I had happened when I was young. I think I was in the first grade. The layout of our house at the time had all the bedrooms upstairs. You walked up the stairs. My room was on the right, my sister's room right next to mine and right across from the stairs, and my mum's room to the left at the end of the landing. It was a regular day. My sister had gotten some new posters that she was putting up on her wall, and I was in the room with her just hanging out, when all of a sudden I got an overwhelmingly uneasy feeling. It felt like someone was watching me. I turned around and saw what looked like a very tall figure wrapped in a large white bedsheet walking down our stairway very slowly. I watched until it was down the stairs and out of my sight. Then I ran out the room to go to my mum's room just as she was walking out, and I said, "Mum, did you see the lady?" Obviously she was confused, so I told her what I saw, and we checked the house, and we couldn't find anything or anyone. In the same house, I don't remember exactly what was going on this particular day, but I was upstairs just outside of my room when I saw something that looked like a fuzzy black blob, perhaps the size of a rabbit, floating from one side of my room to the other, and it disappeared when it hit the wall. I looked on the other side of the wall, my sister's room, and nothing was there. The next part of my life where I remember having any experience happened when I was in high school. My dad had gotten a new house, and there was something about his house. I always had a strange uneasy feeling when I was either home alone or the only one awake. This is the time of my life where I felt like the most happened. A lot of small things, small noises where I couldn't pinpoint an origin. It got to a point where I couldn't sleep in a room by myself because I would hear knocking on the walls or footsteps in the room I was in. There was one night when I was sleeping in my sister's room, and she was asleep already. My dad was asleep in his room, and I was watching whatever was on TV past midnight. All of a sudden I heard what sounded like someone running full speed with heavy footsteps up the stairs. My heart was racing. I was so scared, and the door was still open. So all I did was face the wall and hold the blanket over my head until I fell asleep. After that, I started sleeping downstairs. I would sleep on the couch that was directly under my old room, like most kids in high school. I would stay up pretty late. There was one night I was watching TV. Must have been around 3 a.m., and I heard what sounded like someone walking directly above me. I wrote it off as my sister walking to the bathroom until I asked her the next day, and she told me she was asleep before midnight and hadn't gotten up until the morning. I eventually stopped sleeping in that room. Another time I was watching a movie with my family, in the room that has a view of the stairs and the upstairs bathroom, and I saw what looked like a floating ball of light in the bathroom. It stayed there for a few seconds, before disappearing. Another room in that house that gave me weird, uneasy feelings was my dad's room. Any time I would walk in there by myself, I just had a weird feeling I couldn't explain. The only other things that I've had happen to me were 2 instances of sleep paralysis. One was pretty simple. I had fallen asleep on the couch at my mum's house, and in this sleep paralysis dream, or whatever you want to call it, a bunch of friends of mine had come in one by one to talk to me about the couch, when all of a sudden everyone disappeared, and the house was empty, and my body wouldn't let me sit up. I was trying so hard to move or speak, and nothing was working until suddenly I snapped out of it and sat straight up. The other time I was asleep in my bed, I thought I had woken up and was staring at my ceiling when all of a sudden a dark figure without a face started moving over to me and taking up my vision, and I could feel 2 hands moving up my sides, and I was full of fear. and once I couldn't see anything but darkness and woke up with my heart pounding. Since that last instance of sleep paralysis, I haven't had anything happen to me. I have since become a skeptic of the paranormal and have started to think maybe all of my experiences may have been an overactive imagination. But I am interested to see what anyone else thinks about my experiences and why I had these at a younger age, but nothing in at least 8 years. To start this off, I should say I've never done a genuine paranormal investigation. I've always been interested, but never had the money for gear. Not many places I know to investigate near me, and no friends interested in accompanying me. I live in the northern part of the Netherlands, an area where, as far as I'm aware of, there isn't much of a ghost hunting community. Not really many locations rumored to be haunted, and no businesses marketed towards ghost hunting tours or haunted locations and such. Despite the region seemingly being devoid of paranormal research communities, I've experienced numerous paranormal experiences that have proven without a doubt to me that there is something worth investigating. I'll gladly share my experiences if people want to hear them. They're probably nothing compared to well-known haunted places, but they were very intense for me and the people who accompanied me. To get to my point, I currently live in an old barn, remodeled into 3 homes. The landlord couple in the back, his parents on the front right, and me and 7 others in the front left and upstairs. I sleep in the only downstairs room in my section of the building, and all floors, doors and stairs are extremely noisy, so I can clearly hear anyone walking upstairs or entering through the front door. I hear when people go upstairs, or when they come downstairs. There is one door leading to the landlord's residence through the inside, but it's past a long hallway that only connects to the entryway to my room. The hallway leads to some loud doors which I make sure are closed every night, and on the other side of those doors is a storage room, then an emergency exit, and behind that, a hallway to the landlord's home. Yes, my house would be a perfect horror game location, I know. The Baker family house looked like Disneyland compared to this freakish house, honestly. And to make things worse, the house is mostly surrounded by woods, and one house that's also almost fully surrounded by wood. About 50 meters or more north of these, and one street to the east going north to south. Across the street is a mix of plains and woods and marshland. It may come as no surprise when I say I think the house is haunted. The building survived World War II, and possibly even a long time before that. It was here before the nearby town was built, and before the forest behind my house was there. It used to be farmland before they planted trees to make a park, and the forest part of the park. Considering all of that, I'd say the house has to be at least 150 years old, maybe 200. 200 meters south of the house is a building for scouts, where kids typically go once a week to learn to make fires, recognize medicinal plants, and how to survive in the wild. I was a member when I was a kid, and remember feeling creepy chills and feeling watched in that area any time we stayed the night, or even just when our weekly meetups lasted till midnight or later. There shouldn't be wild animals in the forest beyond maybe some foxes or smaller critters like bunnies, and I've never been proven wrong about that in the last 15 years I've been into this forest. So when I feel watched like that, it sends shivers down my spine. Lo and behold, I live in a place that's creeped me out my whole childhood, and I've honestly even never minded because as I've gotten older I've experienced less and less paranormal activity, so I almost stopped believing it would affect me again. However, things in this house just aren't as they should be. As previously stated, I can hear people walk upstairs, or especially when they come downstairs or when someone enters from the emergency/landlord area or the front door. Considering I live with 7 people directly, and several more just some doors away, hearing footsteps upstairs or at the stairs or hearing doors just isn't weird to me. For all I know, it could be ghosts, but it's not worth worrying about when there's this many people it could be. Yet, without ever hearing anyone on the stairs and without hearing any doors, lights turn on at night in the kitchen or in my hallway? It's hard to say. There's an opaque window above my bed that leads to the hallway, and I often wake up to the lights turning on, but I never hear the door close after, nor do I hear footsteps. But when I look, there's no one to be found, and all the doors are as they were before. It's not just the lights either. I've encountered the fridge door ajar before in the same circumstances, where no one besides me is downstairs. For the record, I've tried sneaking down the stairs or through the hallway, but I always hear it. I even hear the house cat wandering the upstairs halls and coming down or up, so no one is going down those stairs that quiet, and even if they did, the doors always creak. Most damning of all, the piano plays by itself. There's a piano right across from my window between my room and the hallway, which I mentioned before, and sometimes I'll hear notes being played. Nothing coherent, but not blind keys slamming either. Anytime I look through the window, I don't see any movement. It's opaque so I can't see clearly. But I should see movement if someone is at the piano, especially when they leave. And when I open my door to look, there never is anyone there. Housemates who lived here longer than I have discussed the ghost piano too. They've heard it sometimes I haven't, despite being in bed around the same time, which is just as mysterious as it can be. The cat avoids this hallway most of the time, and despite sleeping with a different housemates every night, he's only slept in my room once in 10 months, and only enters my room for a few minutes at a time, usually only to utilize that I have a door to the backyard in my bedroom. As far as I know, that's not a good sign. Hey guys, it's Morten. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's collection of haunted house stories. If you did, you can let me know down below. Your thoughts and comments are always very much appreciated, and I will be back again to join you on Thursday for some train and railroad stories. And finally, I'd like to give a big thank you to my members and patrons whose names you can see on screen, and if you'd like to get some haunted hotel stories for tomorrow, feel free to join their ranks and find out more. Until next time guys, good night.